Today's forum, Unleashing Creativity, is brought to us from the Puffin Foundation West, represented here today by Mark and Java Kittrick and their guests, and we thank them very much. So, creativity is a positive word. We all aspire to be creative. We know we could do great things if we had it, but you can't bottle it and you can't buy it. You have to work at it. And there is one lesson from Dr. Seuss. It says, think left and think right, think low and think high. Oh, the thinks you think up, if only you try. Keep that in mind today. These speakers are fluent in creativity. While they apply their creative talents in vastly different professions, clearly they've been successful in part because they think differently. Please welcome Brett Kaufman, founder and CEO of Kaufman Development, Cindy Foley, Executive Assistant Director and Director of Learning Experience at the Columbus Museum of Art, Natasha Sleznick, Professor of Human Science at Ohio State and founder of Star House, and Michael Bongiorno, Director Designer at the Design Group. Michael, go ahead.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to kick things off by making everyone incredibly uncomfortable. I want you all to close your eyes for a moment and visualize the following three words: people, place, and innovation. And so as you visualize those three words, what did you imagine? What ideas were generated? So, okay, open your eyes. Now, in the middle of the table, you're going to see a bucket of Legos. And what I would like you each to do is to grab a handful of those Legos and pick one of those words, just one of them, and try to visualize what that means to you. You only have a few minutes, so get to work. Oh, you guys have enough to do. So I'm going to give you another little bit to wrap things up. And as you finish your creation, feel free to take a picture of it. And maybe you can tweet it. Yeah. I'm seeing some really cool sculptures. Okay, great. So we can give you all the time in the world, but we probably do need to wrap things up a little bit here. What I want you to do is I want you to take what you worked on, and I want you to turn to the person to the right of you and share with them what you did, what you came up with, what it was about. It's terrifying, isn't it? Okay, so now think about as you wrap things up, think about some of the connections as you talk to the person next to you. Like, what did you learn from each other? You know, what did you learn about what they did, how they think about things? And, you know, did you make any connections when you were working on it and as you shared it? We knew this would be... Thank you, Doug. I know you guys were having way too much fun. I didn't think you were going to like this that much. You know, we thought this would challenge a typical expectation of what went on at a Metropolitan Club luncheon. And I thought, you know, I wasn't sure how you would react, was generally adults hate doing things like this in front of other adults because guess what? You're exposed, you're vulnerable, you know, someone might not like what you've done. And in some ways that's good because you're out of your comfort zone, right? You're challenged. to really solve an ill-defined problem. I gave you a few words, and I asked you to kind of come up with something. Do you have time to have them share?
One or two.
How about one or two brave souls? I'd like you to share what you did and what it's all about. We have a... There's some pointing going on. Yes?
Okay, so I'm one who just kind of creates as I go. But the thing that I found most interesting when we were sharing was that when we shifted the viewpoint, then it was an entirely different creation. So
Fascinating. That's excellent. What a great learning experience that was. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, Shava.
So we decided to be creative and not listen to you.
Good. I'm so glad.
And so we actually made two different table ones. So we passed it around and each person added pieces. We think that these are the next buildings, Fort Street 215.
Excellent. Please make note of that. Get that on video. It's interesting, when you put children in a situation like this, they don't really care. They don't think about what others are thinking about them. They just get out there and they're completely unleashed creatively. And we kind of lose that as adults sometimes. We need it the most at the time we are adults, because the world that we have in front of us today and that we're encountering moving forward is full of these wicked, complex problems that we need that kind of creativity to solve. So I'm approaching this conversation with the panelists from a place of really deep curiosity about how others use their imaginations to solve complex problems. And a lot of research that's going on right now, and Cindy can speak to this, relates to what's called the creativity crisis, where there's so much technology to distract children, so much structure in their play and in their learning environment, and so much overscheduling that children are not learning how to spend time in free thinking exercising, reveling in uncertainty and unstructured play. And that's really where creativity happens. So, like, for example, the Legos. We could have given you a kit of Legos. You know they sell kits of Legos right now, right? And kids buy those kits of Legos. You would have followed a discrete set of instructions to build that, which is good instruction following, but it's a very well-defined problem. We gave you an ill-defined problem and asked you to kind of solve around that. That's where the creativity comes into play. So moving forward, our kids are going to have to deal with a much messier world with fewer resources to move forward with, and a series of really wicked sort of societal problems. And they can't go into all of this being less creative. And in some ways, with the kind of current impacts of technology, our kids are a little bit less creative as a premise. But that's something I want to really know about. Is that true? Is that not true? And so how do we encourage creative thinking, not just for children, but for employees and businesses who also always have to come up with the next big thing? You hear about that all the time. You ask Google what their process is, and their day is a series of questions, right? And they're always discovering things through questions and creativity and that type of thing. So in the spirit of David Weinberger's famous quote, that the smartest person in the room is the room itself, we've assembled this panel here and with all of you to have a conversation about unleashing creativity and finding unexpected intersections. The reason I asked you to visualize those three words is because these three panelists represent what that means: people, place, and innovation. You had a brief introduction, but Cindy with the museum is really focused on teaching innovative thinking. Brett Kaufman looks at a lot of innovations in placemaking, and Natasha is constantly looking for innovations in human services where those societal wicked problems exist. So, but before I ask my first question, I want to read this definition of creativity that Cindy has shared with me. And I think that creativity means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Our take on it is that it's typically confused with artistic creativity. That's one part of it. But creativity is much more than artistic creativity, and that's what we're going to learn from our guest today. So for the process of starting things off, we're going to call creativity the process of using imagination and critical thinking to generate new ideas that have value. Or creativity is the imagination applied. So to start things off, I want our panelists here to tell us a little bit about what they do. So Cindy, as a representative of the cultural sector, who inspires learning and thinking, what is on the mind of cultural institutions, and how do you see your world changing? What are your priorities in the coming years?
Great question, and I'm going to actually go back in time before I can go forward in time and say, as you may know, we've been in some construction as of late at the Columbus Museum of Art, and actually Nanette, my director, asked me a question shortly after starting there, and she said, as we begin to change our outside self, I want us to reflect on who we are as an institution. What is our value? What do we contribute? What is the change that we need to take place in this community? What can we be responsible for? And I remember thinking, oh man, we're going to have to grapple with that at the exact same time we're trying to decide, how to move through a new outside us. And that's where we started to do some incredible soul searching. The museum really began to look at lots of materials, and one in particular was the Institute for Museum and Library Service. It's the #1 funding agency in the United States for museums and libraries. Made a report in 2009 in which they said, we no longer we live in the 21st century, and this era is incredibly different from the era before, and we have to change. Museums and libraries must change. And this really promoted us to think a lot about, well, what kind of changes are they talking about? Just a stat I want to share with you is that they shared with us, is in the 20th century, most people on average had 1 to 2 jobs in a lifetime. In the 21st century, most people on average will have between 10 to 15 jobs in their lifetime. And the more we thought about that, the more we thought about this great quote that I'm going to share with you, and it haunted us. At times of change, the learners are the ones that will inherit the world, while the knowers will beautifully be prepared for a world that no longer exists. We, as a museum, were living in the knower world. We have amazing objects and amazing spaces, but we were about producing knowledge and pushing that knowledge out. And serving educational groups, we would push out lesson plans, push out content. And we realized, no, in the 21st century, that's not what our community needs from us. They need the thinking. And this is when we made a real shift to say, our place is about promoting learning and thinking, and who to better model that than the artists that we house in the museum setting. So that's where we're going, is how do we do that better? How do we continue to do that? And how do we move into the century we're in now?
Thanks for sharing that, Cindy. Brett, I'm going to turn it over to you. As someone who gives shape to the physical city and who makes places for all of us to live, work, and play, what's on your mind? What do you see changing in your world, and what are some of your priorities in the coming years?
Yeah, sure. So when our firm was founded, it was founded on the belief that we could redefine what community meant. And for us, that required us to really think about the things that we're really passionate about, that we think other people are too. So things that appeared to be totally unrelated to real estate development, totally unrelated to the fundamentals of building place, were things that we found were actually very connected. So the fact that I like to run or listen to music or like art or volunteering, those things on the surface didn't have any connection whatsoever to the fundamentals of real estate. And in fact, they really do. They've got, we believe, a lot to do with what the future of building community really means. And that's really something that we've now been experimenting with. We've kind of taken some big steps forward with, but we think has got a tremendous amount of room to expand upon. And that's really where our focus is on how can we do that both in the urban core, how can we create that urban experience in a suburban world where people don't all want to live downtown, but they want the kinds of amenities, they want the kinds of design, the kinds of experiences that we're all kind of seeking.
Well, and it was always impressed me that it seems like there's a sort of deeper social experience or expectation in the way that you do your work and how you think about the people that are living in your developments live.
Yeah, and again, a lot of that comes from personal experience. Having groups like the Star House available to our residents at their fingertips. You know, in the past, we would, as a family, try to volunteer and find it to be very bureaucratic and very difficult just to give of your time. And we know everybody wants to do that, but somewhere along the line, they get a little bogged down in the process, whether that be volunteering, whether that be fitness activities, wellness programs, innovation. We are trying to create space that makes that really easy for people just to hop in and get past all those barriers.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your work. Natasha, so are you wondering why you're here today? You're thinking one of these things is not like the other. So it's really important that Natasha is here because you're really representing an underserved part of our population in the social services sector. And you, I think, of all of us, more than all of us, is dealing with the societal wicked problems. And one of those is homelessness. And so what do you tell us why you do what you do, and tell us some of the, how you see your world changing and what your top priorities are moving forward as well.
Why do I do what I do, and priorities? So I met my first homeless kid maybe 20 years ago. And the first time I met this youth, they talked about their terrible abuse at home by their parents and parents' boyfriends, and their multiple suicide attempts, and their horrible alcohol and drug addiction, and how they had attempted multiple times to get help in the system by representatives of the system, and how nothing ever worked, and they never got what they were looking for in order to reintegrate back into our social fold. And when I met this particular kid for the first time that was telling me these stories, I was filled with strong emotion. I was filled with, I would say, shock. I was appalled. I was enraged. Then I got really sad. And I feel like I was fueled by these terrible feelings in order to move forward and to kind of devote my professional life to figuring out how we can get these kids off the streets and back to where they should be, which is experiencing love and well-being and care and feeling a part of our social group. I think that some of the challenges with homelessness is that we haven't been very successful in ending homelessness for adults, for families, for youth. I mean, this is still a major problem, and I think that being here today talking about creativity is where the conversation needs to be, because I think what happens is we stop looking outside of ourselves in order to solve these really important problems, but it's going outside of ourselves and seeking people who think very differently from us that is really going to help us solve these problems. It's going to be looking at replacing the systems that don't work with new systems. It's going to agencies that don't normally work or have anything to do with social service groups. It's about looking for resources in unlikely places. It's about engaging influentials to action. And I have an experience with that with Terry O'Connell, who was a regional vice president of Time Warner Cable, who similarly had the same experience that I had when he met with the homeless youth, and he got engaged into action. And because of him, the Star House is offering way more services than they, if I were just doing everything myself, would have ever been able to do. And because of him, we have a building where we're not going to be able to have to turn away kids. And I think he thinks completely differently from me. He's a businessman, and I'm a therapist, and he's very different. But it's because of him we've incorporated business ideas into the structure and organization of the program. We even look at business ideas in how to solve the problem, like we're looking at social enterprise. And I think, so I think in order to solve these problems, I think creativity is really where it's at.
Right, I appreciate you saying that. So, I'd have to imagine for all of you, and Natasha, you can address this first, that, you need, and I think your inspiration as I hear about it is, what you experienced emotionally viewing these children. Are there any other places things that you tap into, things that you do, about your process that maybe is different? Because you do all approach things differently, and maybe you don't realize that about yourselves, and maybe you do. But I think a lot of us see that in all of you. What is it a little bit different about the way you maybe go about inspiring yourself that can help us understand what breeds that creativity? Any of you can answer that.
Well, for me, I am fortunate to have really great people around me, and that's not just in our Kaufman Development Group, that's in the broader community. So, I mean, Michael, you and I have had this experience where it's a collaborative effort. It's when you get like-minded people that are not afraid to look at doing things differently, you can really, like a good band, like a good jazz jam band, you name it. It's just, I play a note, you play a note, and then all of a sudden stuff starts happening. We inspire each other, and it kind of removing those barriers, like Natasha was saying, the idea of business not being creative, removing the barriers, the norms of what you're supposed to do, and just kind of get in a room and decide that you're willing to try to do something different has been really inspiring for me.
I think, for me, I could put it in two categories. One category that I thrive in is I'm really good at the what if question. And I live in that space of curiosity. And recently we've been teasing that, in some ways the best space to be is if you're a curiosity breeder. Do you breed the kind of curiosity that then spurs people to say, oh, well, we could look into that. We could see what's next. And I think for people who are wanting to see change, they have to understand their role, their leadership role in that change. And sometimes it isn't the idea. It may not be me that's developing the idea, but what is my role in activating that in others? Because only, I think to go back to Brett's point, only in a team. And Joshua Wolf-Schenck, wrote a great book about it's in the intersection between people that great ideas come, not in the individual. So how, as leaders, do we think about us as agents of change and wonder and curiosity breeders, I think?
Thank you.
So for me, I keep going back to the experience of feeling really passionately about something that creates angst in you, and that this is the seed that propels me, it fuels me to move forward, to do things that I think may be out of my comfort zone in order to solve a problem. I think it's that when some people experience a problem or an issue that creates yucky feelings that are distasteful, like this rage or sadness, that you push them down. But I think that in this kind of work, what you have to do is embrace those feelings and use your true human self to fuel your actions forward, because that's what creativity is about. It's about turning an idea into action.
Excellent. Yeah, it's great to hear all of you kind of speak in those terms, especially as you think about where things are coming from for you. You do that, right? But it's incredibly difficult. It's not something that just comes out of you, right? You have to actually struggle a little bit with that, because there is a natural inclination to kind of cower away or just kind of put it away and stuff it away. And so it takes a fair amount of courage. It also takes a lot of risk. I think what a lot of you do as well is that you've stuck your necks out a bit, right? You're doing things that other people haven't done before. And I'm sure there have been some failures along the way, which I always look at failure as a great way to learn. Sorry, I should be looking at the audience. But fascinated with my panelists. Can you tell us a little bit about, I'm sure you've all failed colossally before. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of those failures? I'll perfectly easily admit mine.
Oh yes, there's failures. I think anytime you try something new, and actually I'm going to quote Michael Bongiorno for this. If any of you are at the museum, there's a little exhibition in one of our, in the Center for Creativity on play. And there's a guide by cell where you can hear Michael Bongiorno talking about that.
It's not about me.
No, I know, but it's a great point that it's only in the 100th drawing that has failed that the one comes that works. And at the museum, what has to happen for us is first there has to be space for the failure, and that means very brave leadership. And I think, the failures, I can tell you, a lot of you have been to the museum, you've seen where we've been trying connectors. Connectors are ways that we want to engage visitors in thinking in the galleries. And some of them fail miserably. And we document and we look at them, and Nanette actually has one in her office as her memory of the failure, because she was convinced it would work. And
a monument of failure?
Yeah. And, but we have to be honest with ourselves when it crashes and burns, and then learn from it. So I think failure has to couple with bravery, though, and incredible courage. And it's something even Brett and I were talking about at lunch, is the fear.
Yeah, the fear of failing, I think, is a big thing that just keeps people from even trying. So in real estate, you can't really have colossal failures. If you do,
I was trying to be dramatic.
Yeah, you don't usually get invited to speak on panels. So far so good. But we had a meeting this morning where we talked about kind of the 10,000 hour idea, and that people don't just like burst on the scene and automatically become all-stars and super creatives and whatever we put names to them. There's usually a lot that went into that, years and years of struggle and challenges and experiments and testing and figuring out. It's not a straight line. And so, sure, a lot of setbacks, a lot of you wanted that deal, this thing didn't happen. And eventually, if you kind of keep working at it, you keep, to Natasha's point, the idea of knowing where you want to go, knowing what you love, even when you're having those setbacks. We have challenges every day, but we're having fun. We love what we do. We love who we're doing it with, and it doesn't feel like failure.
Great.
And I've experienced lots, and I continue to experience failure all the time. And I suppose that the biggest failure for me over time in terms of working with the homeless youth has been, well, my training is I'm a professor, and the Star House started as a research program that, the kids in Columbus became connected to. So when the research ended, we couldn't close the drop-in center, because this is where all the kids came to get food and rest and connect. So I started to work towards trying to keep the drop-in center as a regular community-based program, and I failed on multiple levels through this endeavor. One of the main ways I failed was, you have to have really good social skills in order to be able to negotiate with people in the community. I mean, I don't think I have terrible social skills, but I think you need really good ones. And I think that I failed with some relationships in trying to build relationships with certain people or groups who are essential in order to support what I wanted to happen with homeless youth. And what I did is I accepted my failure, and then I would work with other people who would help me, fix my mistake, kind of help me fix what I failed at.
Well, thank you for all of you for being vulnerable that way and sharing your failures with us, even though I don't think I ever actually heard Brett share one, but that's okay. We'll talk about that later. In a few minutes, we're going to move to audience questions, but I'd like to ask a final question, maybe a final thought. And this idea of connectivity, I'm hearing a lot of that. It's kind of like what I said earlier, the room is the smartest person, right? When you walked in, you were met by stories of like GCAC's campaign right now, the creativity campaign, and they're looking at a different way to kind of align businesses with the arts and that kind of thing. So what do you imagine, how do you imagine you can connect to what other sectors are doing so that you could cause this cross-pollination, so that you can benefit from the minds of people like Cindy and Brett, and vice versa? Do you see any possible concrete examples of that moving forward?
Well, I could start. One that really was eye-opening, I think, for the museum and has opened a plethora of new opportunities is a partnership we started with the Alzheimer's Association of Central Ohio, because the imagination, which is a critical part of creativity, is the last cognitive skill you lose. And as we began to talk with them, we realized we were both after the same thing. They wanted to really help the caregivers and the patients, feel some sort of, feel something, and we wanted to bring out the imagination. And together we created a program that is kind of extraordinary, but it was only in the intersection between what we're both good at and what we believe together. And I think that's now what we're looking at is, it doesn't matter whether it's a social service organization or another arts group in town or the Franklinton district, whatever it may be, there are ways that we have shared energies. It's about that exchange too.
Right, so that it turns into more of an ecosystem rather than individual players or classes, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Well, I think forums such as this, where people can come together and talk about the problems that we face, and it provides an opportunity for people to meet each other and then form connections and networks and systems that can be new and innovative.
Yeah, I mean, I found your example really interesting, and it was really a creative way to harness the energy of, again, an ecosystem or a group of people or network, so that we don't really know what the missing piece is until we find that missing piece. So it's really great to hear that. Brett?
Yeah, I think the idea of conversations like this are really important. For me, I never really saw creativity in my life in a way that I could apply it until much later. And I think most people kind of stumble with that. I ducked my head into the art room in high school and thought, okay, this is kind of a place I'd like to be, but I couldn't paint. And so I didn't know how I could funnel that. And I think creativity can be everywhere if you think of it in a way, if you stop and actually think about what your thing is and how you can do that differently. We do that in every aspect of our company, whether it be finance or programming or management or construction. There's always a way to be thoughtful about trying to do something different, which is, to your definition, creativity.
Excellent. That was a really great way to close out our part of the discussion. And so I need to read this verbatim. It's CMC's tradition to take audience questions. Please step up to the microphone, give us your name, and ask your question. And we thank you in advance for not making long editorial comments. You play with the Legos fine, but you're nervous to ask.
Hi, I'm Java Kittrick, Puffin Foundation West, and Natasha, I'm very inspired today, and we'd like to do some bottom-up granting for you, and I pledge $1,000 to start out.
Oh, thank you. That's fabulous.
Campbell, happy to break the ice and ask a question here. I'm wondering if I know none of you are in education, but your thoughts on making creativity part of a curriculum or even a mentality, whether that's a school or a business. I'm wondering how we can make it more ingrained as a part of our routine or a part of our lives.
I'll tackle that one. So at the museum, my area is education, and what we're doing is working with Central Ohio educators in order to make creativity more visible. As the standards have become much more a part of our lives, we've moved in every discipline. We've moved a little bit further from thinking. And so what we have to do is work with school districts in order to develop habits of mind, but also thinking routines, strategies that engage. I mean, you even hear Battelle and STEM talking about this. They're no longer calling STEM science, technology, mathematics, and engineering. They're now calling it strategies that engage minds. So I think we all need to shift and say, what are we doing to help in education with the thinking? We're working with Harvard's Project Zero. They have a lot of work on making thinking more visible. And in particular, we received a grant called Making Creativity Visible. So we look at, and I actually brought it, if any of you are geeky and like rubrics, I've got a rubric for you, and it's going to be out there. But we brought a rubric we've been working on called Thinking Like an Artist, and it looks at those factors that we have to, there are behaviors, dispositions, and conditions that need to take place within the classroom in order for us to begin to shift the culture towards creativity. So.
Earlier, oh, is that a question?
It's a question.
All right.
Have we reached a critical mass of creativity in Columbus in such a way that it will help to define us? And if not, where do we stand on that?
I don't think we've reached the critical mass yet, but I think we're having the conversation, and there's a level of awareness which is really starting to turn out some great stuff. It's an effort. It's a long effort. It's a mind shift, a shift in a whole mentality that is not going to happen overnight. There's plenty of room. Things are changing quickly, and we will need to react fast to keep up. But we're starting to do that. I mean, everywhere I turn, and I maybe am in a small circle, there's all kinds of innovative, smart, creative people doing different stuff than it's been done historically all over the place.
It's interesting, if any of you know Dave Staley, he's a OSU professor, but he did a TED Talk on this notion of universitas, and he said instead of benchmarking Columbus to Austin and all these other cities, he actually thinks we should benchmark ourselves to Florence, Italy at the time of the Renaissance, and because we're much more of that kind of city. It's not about, oh, look at this grand company that we have. We have all these companies and all of this stuff happening, and it's in the intersections of what we do, and I think that's how we are going to be known at a certain point as a creative city that does incredible things across our business and education and cultural community, rather than a city that has some anchor institutions and then everybody else. So I think we've got a lot of growing still to do, but I think we're in a unique place.
Dr. Shoshana Goldberg at Ohio State University is working on a paper right now, and it's called In the Shadows of the Creative City, and who's getting left out in this conversation. And I'm kind of curious about that as I think about, are we addressing, again, to go back to Richard Florida, the idea of a class, and then who is not in that class, and are they left out of the conversation? You guys have any thoughts on that?
I think the people that are being left out are people that are afraid or not raising their hand to get in. It's in that creative world, there's a real openness to having people come in. It's just the kind of social norms and barriers that we have to break down to make it easier for somebody to raise their hand and say, I've got an idea.
Are you talking about, like, what class do you mean? Like,
I think about issues of, poverty and racism and that type of thing. And
well, I thought that's what you meant. So
yeah.
I was just making sure. But it seems like a lot of times when we're coming up with, of course, I'm focused on solutions to social problems, but we don't bring in those who are experiencing the problems into the solution. So I think when you're trying to solve social problems, making sure that you bring in those who are experiencing the social problem isn't done enough, and it should be done more, like action-based, so that you engage those who are experiencing homeless, who are unlikely to volunteer to come to a talk like this or whatever. But I think that's really important for us to reach out to those who are experiencing the problem and pull them in, engage them.
Right, because what you're dealing with is very sort of basic quality of life issues first. You have to get people clothed, fed, and it's not until then that you can, help them create meaning. Because in some way, there's a great quote that said that poverty is not just the lack of money, it's the lack of meaning in life as well. And so, but you can't get past, as a society, those other things that you can be doing if you can't solve your basic needs.
Right.
And so it sounds like that's, where you are struggling with how you take people that don't see meaning in life right now. They don't see possibilities, and how can we, help them that way? I think it's a really important conversation that we need to have as a community moving forward. Is that there's got to be a balance. And right now things are a little bit out of balance. I'm sorry, we have questions coming from the audience.
Yeah, and I just want to throw this in. I think we also, especially the established institutions and businesses in this community, we have a responsibility to reach out. And I would say this is an existential question we deal with and talk about all the time is, we know we're not doing enough. And recently we had a group of the Ethiopian Tauhito Social Service Agency, which is an after-school program for immigrant and refugee youth. We found out about them. They were wanting to come to the museum, and we realized, wait a minute, this isn't about us waiting for them to come. It's time for us to start the conversation. We have to develop a relationship with them, and that may mean years before we can actually make change, but we have to commit to the relationship and getting to know them and finding out what their needs are before we can just expect that to happen. So,
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Debra Guy. I'm a guest here today. I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I particularly appreciated what Natasha had to say about engaging the entire palette of emotions rather than trying to stuff them down when dealing with problems. In hearing the conversation so far, I've heard a lot of left brain thinking, a lot of structure. What role does the intuitive side, the right brain thinking, have to have in creating solutions to these problems and in engaging creativity in the community?
So there are over 100 different definitions of creativity. Not one of them is established. The one we chose today, I think, actually addresses that, which it says it's critical thinking and the imagination applied. If you want to, which, the whole right brain, left brain thing has been kind of debunked somewhat, but if you want to look at that, imagination could be, the right brain, and critical thinking could be, it's the convergent and divergent thinking, right? We can't have creative ideas without both. There is absolutely no space for that to happen if we don't have both types of thinkers together. This is why the intersection is so critically important. But that means everyone has to realize that their role. By Michael putting those Legos on the table, that ambiguous challenge means that those who are hesitant have to actually take a much bigger step into the realm, because we need them too. We need the folks that, it is a little bit more scary, but on the flip side, their contributions make it all the better.
Only 1 in 4 people believe that they're creative, and most people believe that one is born with creativity or talent. But the research doesn't really support that. The research suggests that the great works that have been created by like Shakespeare and Mozart and these great minds were created from motivation, commitment, encouragement. It could be encouragement from parents and others that you care about around you, training and practice. And that also, if you've ever heard of Rollo May, he's a great thinker of our time in existential psychology and humanism. And according to him, people go through developmental stages, with the final stage being the creative stage. And this is a stage of self-actualization, that you become an authentic self. And this is where you come out of yourself. You go beyond simple egocentrism to start developing empathy for others. And this is the core of creativity, according to Rollo May. And me, I like that too.
We say, simply that trust your gut if your gut's good, and you build a good gut by really knowing exactly who you are and what you believe in, and that you've practiced and worked hard and really strengthened that so that your intuition is founded in something, that you're not just jumping without a parachute.
Great. Thanks, Brett. Bill.
Hi, I'm Bill Lafayette, and I've finally come to realize that I am probably a creative economist.
Excellent.
But my question is, for really people like myself, this is a topic I think you've touched on, and that is if we aren't in Richard Florida's creative core, if we're an accountant or a banker or somebody like that, how can we as a community encourage those folks to unleash their creativity? It seems to me that if we could do that, we would really be on to something.
I agree. Could force them to play with Legos.
And we do. I actually, your question is precisely, I think, what the museum's been trying to think about is we don't want to just be a space where we honor the creative kind of work of the past. We want to cultivate creativity in everyone now, today. But the biggest challenge is we have to debunk the myths. And there are a lot of myths. There are a lot of myths that only an artist is creative, or well, I can't draw, therefore I'm not creative. Drawing is just a tool like accounting. Calculating math is it's a tool, right? What we have to do is shift gears and say it's about the development of ideas and doing something with those. And so giving people opportunity, giving them confidence, and for us, that's the route we're going is to look at the opportunities and make people feel really confident about what they're doing.
Yeah, I would just add, we all chuckle creative economist. Well, but why? We work with lenders that are willing to find new relationships, that are willing to find new ways to do things. I think the way that we change that is by letting those people win. The people that are coming up with the new solution in any area, those are the people we need to work with, and that will become the norm, and the others, the traditional way, will be left behind.
Thank you.
Hi, Michele Chippis, and my question surrounds finances. And so, do a lack of resources or finances maybe prohibit getting into creativity? For example, might parents discourage a child from pursuing a career in art or music because they don't see that as being a financially well-off career or so forth?
It's actually really, we could do a whole session, I think, around that particular, but the thing that comes to mind for me is we have noticed a creativity crisis across the spectrum. There's a great article that Newsweek did looking at the creative crisis, and what they say is that it doesn't matter where you are on the financial, how much you make. Because on one end, you may end up spending a lot of time indoors in front of media, and that's how you spend your days as a child. On the other side, you may be spending a lot of time in activities that are all facilitated by adults, and both of those decrease your creative potential. That what kids need is open play. And so for us, the more we looked at all that research, the more we realized the number one audience we need to be working with are parents and educators of young children in order to message how do we, because both of those, how do we leverage open-ended play in order, no matter where you are on the financial. So just at that base level, the impact is great on either side.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
I'm Mark Allen. I'm a copy editor, writer, word lover in general. I'm thinking about the big arts organizations like the Art Museum, the Symphony, Catco Productions. How important are they to the idea of creativity in our community? In some ways, they are presenting something that somebody else's creativity for us to sort of sit there and look at. We go to a painting and sort of stare at it and say, what does that mean? But how are we supporting these arts organizations enough, and how important are they as part of the community in sort of creating an idea of a creative community in Columbus?
I mean, I'll probably let Cindy handle this one, but I mean, the idea is that, as I mentioned earlier, I used the word ecosystem. I mean, that's one player, right? One actor in all of this. And what these sort of cultural institutions do, whether it be a library or museum or the conservatory, is they don't just do sort of knowledge sharing anymore. That's not, that has been part of what they've done, and it's to kind of share that knowledge. But what they're really looking for is to creating situations where you're intensifying social activities and learning from each other in the spaces that may be associated with the thing that the museums or libraries or conservatories have traditionally done. And so they act as platforms for this dialogue to occur, and they're creating activities. I mean, if you've been to the Center for Creativity, you'll understand that, man, there are a lot of things to do there that you would never expect to do in the museum, which is make noise, get messy, hang out all day, romp around, whatever it is. And so the more our institutions do that, the benefit is that's a place for, which these institutions have in the past done, a place for people to come together, but to engage with each other and the products of the culture in a different way than they have in the past. And so there's a richness in the continuity of the history of the institutions and what they do, combined with the dynamism of what's happening in contemporary society with either young people or millennials.
And it makes me think about the age of the Enlightenment, and the thing the arts do is they evoke wonder, right? They evoke awe, and all the research shows that if we want to be curious human beings, it starts with wonder. You see a 2-year-old and they see their shadow and they, but as adults, that's the role arts play, is they are our pathway. They're our way to opening up to new things. And so they're critically important, especially at a time where we need more creativity.
And I would just add the idea, we're really focused on collaboration and trying to create space for that to happen. And, again, this idea that arts are separate from everything else, we can't create place that isn't well-rounded, that isn't diverse, that doesn't have a really active cultural element to it. And so I think, are they being supported enough? Probably not, and probably we can never support them enough. But we have to. They're critical to the survival of our community.
Excellent.
Great. Thank you so much, speakers. That was so interesting. Remember, you can view and share all of our forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide, and anytime on YouTube. So tell your friends about the wonderful time you had today. Thanks again to the Puffin Foundation, to our speakers. Let's go be our authentic selves.